always saying that cooperatives are a matter of cultural approach. If you don't have it, that's the end of cooperatives. If you want cooperatives, then you're better nurturing this cultural alternative. Otherwise, when the Americans come to me and say, what should they do to promote cooperatives? Promote the culture of being together, helping each other, being limited, not wanted to oppress the others or to buy over the others.
This is the Changing the Narrative podcast. I'm Chris King, and in each episode, I sit down with someone who's actively participated in helping build a different way of running things, be it an economy, an organization, or a community. The aim is to understand how these alternatives to the dominant systems can work in practice, not just the theory of it, but the reality on the ground. Some of the most internationally competitive manufacturing in the world comes out of a part of Italy that built its economy on small firms and cooperatives rather than big business, producing niche, high-quality goods and exporting them everywhere. Bologna, where my guest lives, is what she calls the packaging machinery capital of the world. That's Emilia-Romagna. Shaped by cooperative history, she traces back a century and a half to Italy's unification. My guest this week is Vera Zamagni, Professor of Economic History at the University of Bologna, Senior Associate Fellow at Johns Hopkins University's SAIS Europe, and a former Vice President of the Emilia-Romagna regional government. We get into whether something built over a century and a half in one Italian region can actually travel to New York, to Britain, anywhere the working assumption is that an economy needs a boss and a profit motive to function. We start with a single article in Italy's constitution since 1948 that no government since has ever been able to touch. And we get into what Vera thinks is the real threat to all of this today. We go straight into the conversation from here. If you'd like to hear what came before and how Vera actually got into this work and her years running part of the regional government, you can do so by becoming a Subscriber Plus member, Changing the Narrative, via the website. Here's Vera. Enjoy.
The most important bills concerning cooperatives, they were all proposed by civil society and not taken out of political ideas. Starting with the very original case, which I think is the only case in the entire world, of cooperatives being named in constitution in Italy. Article 45 of our Italian constitution, which was discussed in 1946-47 and then enacted 1st of January 1948, has Article 45 devoted to cooperatives. And I've written a piece, unfortunately in Italian, on all the discussions inside the assembly that was charged to prepare the new constitution, all the discussions connected with having or not having an article devoted to cooperatives. And those who were in favor and explained the reasons why they wanted to have this were all belonging to the cooperative movement and were elected into the assembly for other reasons as well, I'm sure, but also to be representatives of the civil society that was interested in cooperatives. But actually, I must say that all parties of the time, including the Communist Party, was in favor. All parties were in favor of this. So the article passed unanimity. No, we had very contrasting parties at the time, from the Liberal Party to Christian Democracy. Luigi Einaudi, who was one of the very famous Italian liberal economists, spoke in favor. And in the discussions which I looked at, he spent quite good words on for having this, article into constitution. And Togliatti, who was the head of the Communist Party in Italy, again, I mean, Togliatti and others even wanted to have another article of constitution that said that enterprises could be either private, capitalist, or state, or cooperative. Then this did not pass. And so our constitution does not say that enterprises can be. But in Article 45, they recognize cooperatives as important parts of the Italian economy in terms of catering for the social needs of people and the cohesion of the country. And so no government can legislate against cooperatives in Italy unless they change the constitution. Of course, some governments supported more than other governments, no doubt, but no one can legislate against.
Yeah, I think that really shows the benefits of having a plurality of voices, diversity of voices from people from a diversity of backgrounds, instead of career politicians who are just getting into politics to serve themselves or vested interests, it's a place that we need to get to once more, having that diversity of voices. So then just taking things back a little bit, for a listener who's never heard the phrase the Emilian model, what is actually distinctive about how the region's economy is put together compared to a conventional one?
Now, I have studied the region economy also behind cooperatives in general for the past 150 years, from unification onwards. Because actually, Emilia-Romagna is the only region that did not exist before unification of the country, because the country unified a number of regions, but Emilia-Romagna was a rather fragmented place in which there were two small duchies, one part connected with the Pope state, and it was connected into one region for which they could not find one single name because there were two parts that were somewhat different. Therefore, they ended up calling it Emilia-Romagna, right, to be able to have approval by the part of the local representatives. So it's the only region that started with unification. And its major aspect is that it has centuries-old tradition of self-government by the part of cities. Go back to the Middle Ages, already 11th century and later. And actually, it was the only place which carried on this city self-government up until unification, as I was saying, in fact. Although, of course, the city self-government then was included in some larger sort of small states, but still it continued. And why I am pointing this out? Because the Emilia-Romagna people have an approach to life which is very active. Namely, they do not expect anything from above or from outside. They engage themselves directly into all sorts of problems that exist. And this idea of self-government is, of course, extremely useful and extremely coherent with an organization of the enterprise like the cooperative organization, which is exactly a kind of enterprise which is self-governed on sort of an equal basis. Everyone participates also to the economic aspects of it, but also to the political ones, so to speak. So the two things are extremely coherent, and I think that this is the real reason why Emilia-Romagna did better in terms of cooperatives than other places, because of this tradition. Of course, it is a tradition that much more fragmented existed also elsewhere. Particularly Tuscany is another place in which this city tradition exists. But they unified as a region Tuscany much earlier on than Emilia-Romagna. So in a way, it does not have a direct connection with cooperatives. like instead in the case of Emilia-Romagna, because cooperatives started in the middle of the 19th century, when precisely the Emilia-Romagna region started, because before there were the city self-governments. So this is my interpretation. Another place in which this approach is very diffused is Trentino. Now, Trentino is another of the Italian regions, much smaller, however. Trentino has only 500,000 inhabitants, and cooperatives are as widespread as in Emilia-Romagna, but their model is less well known because of the size. No? But instead, Emilia-Romagna, being a region of 4,500,000 people, is rather substantial. No? But otherwise, Trentino is pretty similar, although in Emilia-Romagna, the most important inspiration for cooperatives has been the socialist and communist inspiration, while, of course, in Trentino has been the Catholic inspiration. However, in both regions, there is also the other part of inspiration, because, again, even in terms of cooperatives, we like to be plural.
Yeah, and so in terms of like the current situation in Emilia-Romagna, what is the size of the cooperative economy there in terms of output, jobs, membership? How comprehensive is it currently?
Yeah. Now, in Emilia-Romagna, there are 3,600 cooperatives, encompassing some 250,000 collaborators, some members and some instead dependent workers, which reaches some 15% of all the private production in Emilia-Romagna, if you exclude the state cost, bureaucracy, if you exclude that, is 15%. But it's more than this, because it is possible in Italy for the cooperatives to control limited and joint stock companies. And if you add these, which are controlled by cooperatives, you reach easily 20% of the entire economy. But more than this, because one important component of the Emilia-Romagna cooperatives is commercial distribution, supermarkets, hypermarkets, and similar. And these rely often on local small and medium-sized firms producing for them and remaining private, but producing for them, and therefore being included into the so-called virtuous circle of this collective kind of approach. And I have something else to add to what I said before, namely, the other feature of Emilia-Romagna particularly, but of Italy in general, is that we've been not ready to apply the big business approach. Italy is made up of small and medium-sized enterprises all across the country, with a few exceptions, state enterprises, which have been recently privatized, but they were state enterprises. And these small and medium-sized enterprises, but particularly the medium-sized enterprises, have become highly effective and efficient in producing niche products, which are internationally known and internationally exported. People should know that Italy has a surplus in the balance of payments as a result of large amount of exports. And Italy exports some 25% or even 30% more than Russia before the war. Not now, but before the war. And all manufactured products, 90% manufactured products. Right? We all know that Russia exports oil, gas, and these raw materials. And these, particularly middle-sized enterprises, are very strong, as I say, in high-quality products. We have at more or less 1,000 products of the 5,000 that exist in the WTO list, in which we are leaders, international leaders. But if you ask which products, I answer brakes for cars and motorbikes and so on, sold all over the place. No? Machinery, all sorts of very specialized machinery. Bologna, for instance, where I live, is the capital of packaging machinery. We produce packaging machinery for the entire world, and so on and so forth. All types of niche products. Of course, Parmigiano Reggiano and very stylish cruise boats, and so on and so forth. This kind of things. And this is the result, of course, of the artisanal capabilities of Italy when Italy was ahead of everybody else in manufacturing production in the Middle Ages and through the Renaissance. And we could never change, even when United States produced its model of big business, the Italians were not interested.
Right, okay.
And of course, this is connected with cooperatives, because in this environment, cooperatives can be competitive. Big business, probably they could not be competitive.
Right, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And so what do you think would need to happen for that number, the percentage in terms of the economy within Emilia-Romagna, but also more broadly speaking, nationally? What do you think would have to happen for that percentage to increase and for there to be more cooperatives?
We are certainly not in a good period for the kind of traditional activities that cooperatives had in Italy, but also in Europe and in general, because there was a period from the 1970s, I would say, to the end of last century in which cooperatives could really flourish. But then this tendency to build platforms and then to build electronic approach to all sorts of activities, and lately artificial intelligence is making life difficult for cooperatives because, of course, the basic principles of cooperatives is connected with labor, with work. That the same people who work in a company own the company and strategically manage the company. But if instead you have some electronic device or some algorithm that does this for you, what will be left for cooperatives? No, so it's not a good period. However, the Italians go ahead because we, as I often say, have 3,000 years of history. Sometimes we were on top. The Roman Empire, Renaissance. Sometimes we were not doing very well, like the 18th century, 19th century. And then we got into industrialization, but we never wanted to, in a way, imitate the American type of industrialization. And so maybe we are sort of developing even today an approach which is very not in mainstream in the mainstream, but we love it.
But do you think then
will not, because for instance, even recently there's been the production of new cooperatives. The most important example, of course, is the example of social cooperatives, which were started in the 1960s, but had a new law in 1991, and ever since developed very rapidly from a few thousand to 500,000 today of people who work in social cooperatives. Producing what? Producing all sorts of welfare services and inserting disadvantaged people into work So as social cooperatives today produce some 50% of the Italian welfare. So we are not carrying on only the old types of cooperatives. No? We are trying to build new ones. And in addition, we are now branching out in terms of cooperatives, and there are 200 in Emilia-Romagna, the so-called community cooperatives, namely all the villages which are depopulated because they're sitting on hills or mountains, no, or in distant places in the countryside, no, who are depopulated, tend to form community cooperatives that keep alive all kinds of services that are needed to have a community, no? Or to attract people from outside, like having a bar, having an hotel, having a restaurant, no, having a post office, and so on. They do. They are multi-purpose kind of cooperatives, doing many things and attracting some people who are unhappy about living in cities in the place to live, but also, of course, also tourists who visit the place because cultural activities, environmental activities that they do. No? Now, we have already 200 of this only in Emilia-Romagna and a few thousand across Italy, these community cooperatives.
Right.
And more recently, the so-called renewable energy communities. We are building renewable energy communities from below, and quite a number of them are organized in the cooperative form. Not all, no, in other forms, social enterprise. You know.
Do you think then the evolution of the economy across different countries, but maybe focusing on Italy, might become kind of stratified in the sense of the co-ops will take care of the things where profit shouldn't be, the driving force, such as social care, because people shouldn't be making a profit from childcare or elder care, anything like that. And then, inevitably the vested interests are going to want to maintain those bigger companies and the profit that they generate. So do you ever envisage that might be the potential, that you have this kind of two-tiered economy sorts?
Yes, but I'm always debating this with my American friends who come to visit me and they want to know about cooperatives. This is possible in Italy if you have small and medium-sized enterprise in the profit side. Otherwise, this big business want to catch all,
Yeah.
Want, like an octopus, they want to have everything inside. But these small and medium-sized enterprise for profit are limited. They know that they are limited, and therefore love to have cooperatives around. And many times they collaborate on various activities. For instance, the great Bologna exhibition, which attracts so many people for various types of shows and of exhibitions, is now managed by the chairman of a cooperative. But most of the time, the people who go to the exhibition are for profit, but small size or medium size, and they can collaborate very well. As I said, on the shelves of the COPs, there are many products of small and medium size for-profit enterprises, and they collaborate on this. But if you have a big business, then it's a cutthroat competition.
Yeah.
Everyone else has to be defeated, and so the division of labor, okay, but is successful in Italy for this reason.
Yeah.
Because the for-profit part doesn't want to incorporate everything. For instance, also in the case of types of activity like state activities, take hospitals in Italy are public, are state. But all sorts of health services which are connected with a hospital can be done by cooperatives. A hospital not being a corporation, a private corporation in Italy, allows others to do something else, does not need to have everything under control to make more profits.
Yeah, but as you say, as you point out, that capitalism doesn't generally want to coexist with with anything else, and it just wants to consume endlessly. And obviously,
to reduce us to consumers only.
Yeah. And ultimately, the people who are at the forefront of this, they don't know any limits. Meanwhile, so many people are suffering in poverty and all the rest of it. And
Now,
it's just
the entire country of Italy is against this, For profit, non-profit, cooperatives, we cannot conceive this simply.
Leading on from that then, do you think that Emilia-Romagna and essentially the dynamics that exist in Italy, because we were speaking earlier on about the fact that it's actually cooperatives, the existence of cooperatives and nurturing cooperatives is written into the constitution in Italy. So, and there are other laws that are supporting it and around social care and things. So do you think that it's this unique blend of different elements that allow this to exist, allow this number of cooperatives to exist and for them not to be consumed by the capitalist class and demolished and destroyed by that? Do you think it's unique to the environment, or do you feel like there is potential for growth, for cooperatives to thrive and to grow across the globe, despite the circumstances, the hostile environment in which they have to come into existence and survive and overcome?
Last year, it was the year of cooperatives, because that United Nations names years after something. And so I participated into an online conference opened up to the entire world and launched by a British representative of British cooperatives. Unfortunately, British cooperatives have gone down to almost nothing, because they, in a way, could not resist the so-called Anglo-Saxon approach of efficiency, of getting more money, of having more profits, and cooperatives cannot cope with this. So unless there is a cultural climate that opposes this view, there is no future, I would say, for cooperatives. But I'm, in a way, convinced that this approach only to make money and destroy everyone else and remain alone cannot last. No, it's some sort of bubble that will maybe go on for a few more years. I don't know how many, but because it will destroy humanity. So this is my view. And not only my view, I mean, in Italy shared by an incredible amount of the population, and I hope that also elsewhere will increasingly be shared. And so my view is that it is not a good period. But the main sort of enemy, so to speak, is the artificial intelligence, more than the politicians who will come and go, and will change. But artificial intelligence. And myself and a group of people, including my husband, I have a husband who is a great economist also, alternative economist. We have been pointing out to this. And I'm sure you have seen that even the Pope has done this. So pointing out that artificial intelligence is the major problem today, not only for cooperatives, but in general for humanity. So remain human. Now, if we succeed in promoting a movement of this type, remain human. I mean, the Italians can do very well because they know how to remain human. Of course, I don't know whether in the short run there will be a victory of, instead of the transhumanist, the post-humanist, alla Peter Thiel and friends. I cannot say this, I have no idea, but in my view, is important, and we work for this. Not in my name. If they want to go ahead, we have no way of stopping them, no. But not in my name, at the very least, no, because there are very many periods in which humanity has gone astray, completely astray. At least there were people who parted companies from this, and then there was a reconstruction, resurgence, rinascimento, renaissance, and so on and so forth. And so we are working for this. We are working for this. And what is important, working factually, on building up seminars, building up books, building up projects of research in this direction. So we are not simply in words, not doing this. No, but really promoting several activities in this direction. And we have been satisfied recently of seeing that a number of young people are starting revolting against artificial intelligence. And so maybe, who knows?
So this resistance towards the kind of the tsunami that is AI, how can somebody stand up against that individually, collectively, and say not in my name?
Yes, doing projects of research to put it under control and to find ways of using what they offer positively rather than negatively, and to make a general protest against becoming transhuman. We had been starting this already a few years ago, and of course we are pretty alone on this, but now every day I'm reading new books, new articles who are moving against this artificial intelligence. So I think we have to promote, as I said, lines of research, offer some ideas of how to use artificial intelligence positively and how to control it so that it can do much less damage than it's doing already today.
Mm-hmm.
No? The European Union has been the only one in the world insofar to take some action in this direction. Unfortunately, Britain went out. I mean, it's been one of my great sorrow, this having Britain out of the European Union, because I loved my British friends. Actually, I stopped sending. I had some friends with whom I remained in relation, in spite of the fact that I was there from 1969 to 1973, and we exchanged the parcels over Christmas or over other celebration years. I stopped doing it because they never arrived in Britain anymore.
Right.
They had to pay a tariff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
So you mentioned there on the subject of England that kind of Anglo-Saxon approach and model and the culture, and that you feel like the culture that exists there currently isn't conducive, it isn't nurturing a cooperative movement, the spirit, that the number of cooperatives has diminished. So what do you think needs to happen then to turn that around and to change that culture so it is aware of the benefits of the cooperative movement, creating cooperatives and nurturing that, both from like bottom up and top down, because obviously they both play a role in nurturing that cultural change?
Now, my view about Britain is my personal view. I mean, is not an expert view, but my personal opinion of having lived in Britain, of having carried on collaboration with so many British friends and so on and so forth. And my view is the following. Britain, after the Second World War, had the process of decolonization, inevitable in many other places as well, France, and not much Italy because we didn't have many colonies anyhow. And in a way, they lost identity. Which identity would Britain have after having been the largest empire in the world? Not a clear idea. So at some point they said, well, maybe to try to be friends with the other European countries. When Europe started the process of integration in 1949 with the building up of the European steel community, they didn't want to join. They wanted to stay out because they were the largest empire of the world. But 10 years later, they repented, because they were left alone. Actually. And so they tried Europe, but they did not like Europe. No. Many did not like Europe because they were different, still thinking of the past. And in spite of the fact that the British economists were much more pluralist than American economists, most of them decided that they had to acquire the American approach. And they started defeating a number of cooperatives that they had, like the building societies, for instance, which were very important, had been very important cooperatives in Britain, to demutualize them and making them for-profit banks, the result being that most of them failed and the other part were bought by other banks. So they disappeared, but they didn't learn after this. And so, because efficiency in the way it is interpreted by the Americans can only survive in America, because America is a very large place with enormous amount of raw materials, but we Europeans are not the same. And in a way, Britain was different because it built the empire to make up for lack of land, for lack of resources, for lack of raw materials and so on. But after that, so they tried to come in Europe, but did not trust on this. They did not believe, still don't believe. Farage, I think he's a madman to make myself quite clear on this. What does he want? He's not America. So I'm saying often also to the Italians, some professors of business administration who want Italy to copy the American business administration approach. I'm always saying, but Italy is smaller than California to start with. And by second, does not have a big business. So, I mean, it's useless to hope that American business administration can be inserted into Italy. I mean, indeed, I mean, they're not insisting upon pretty much the Italians, but the British, I mean, what else? No? And so my view is this. No? Identity is a crisis of identity in Britain. Instead, I mean, we Europeans knew that we are Europeans, more or less, and one way or the other, we accept this. Britain not yet accept.
How then can people realistically nurture co-ops then, and to try and ensure when they don't have that cultural kind of basis for it, they don't have the laws that are in place as they are in Italy, how can somewhere that has very much embraced the neoliberalist experiment, as it were, how can they hope to even develop a more cooperative, egalitarian, fair economy?
I'm always saying that cooperatives are a matter of culture, cultural approach. If you don't have it, that's the end of cooperatives. No. If you want cooperatives, then you're better nurturing this cultural alternative. Otherwise, no. When the Americans come to me and say, what should they do to promote cooperatives? To promote the culture of being together, helping each other, being limited, not wanted to oppress the others or to buy over the others. It's an alternative to that. No? And believe me, I mean, we are living much better having small and medium-sized enterprises, cooperatives, and so on in Italy than in many other places of the world. I mean, we do not have people like in the United States who have hope lost entirely for their future. Angus Deaton, the American Nobel Prize winner, has written a book, Death of Desperation, no? In which he points out that so many Americans of age between 45 and 65 disappear because of drugs, because of suicides, because of having left hope entirely and not being willing to live anymore. We don't have this kind of situation in our countries, in which instead there is room for even the small producer. The other day I learned, by chance, I was wanted to have a TV program, and I opened up the TV 10 minutes before, and I learned then that there is in Italy an enterprise which produces the uniforms for those who compete in the world competitions with the sword. I don't know how they're called exactly in English.
Fencing, yeah. Fencers.
And this firm is the only one in the world that produces these uniforms, because they need to be capable to work with cloths, but also with mechanical manufacture, with metals, and so on and so forth, and they do it. This is another niche in which we excel. No?
Yeah.
It's a different mentality, and they are happy. They love to do it. No?
Yeah.
And of course, they make up their life, but not more than that. No? They will not become trillionaires, no doubt, in producing uniforms for these people who compete with wars.
Yeah, I suppose, that's another dimension of it, is because nurturing the culture is one thing, but it's also understanding the environment in which you need to nurture that culture. And obviously the environment that we're currently in is one where very powerful, wealthy individuals are trying to, and successfully, atomizing society and pitting one group against the other. They're undermining democracies, but, in so many different ways.
Yeah.
And then also the governments themselves are working in the service of capital, and there isn't that plurality of voices, as we were discussing earlier, that maybe existed in the past, where you had politicians who came from different communities and different backgrounds, different lived experiences, and that plurality helped ensure that things were done in the service of the wider society and the people of that society, rather than in the service of capital and the capitalist class. So it's an incredibly difficult environment in which to try and nurture cooperativism, to nurture cooperatives and that movement, and to counter that culture that exists when it's coming with so much force.
If I may just intervene, in the United States, they are even preventing universities from producing courses or even degrees and so on in alternative to what is mainstream. Something unbelievable. In Italy is not the case, We have built, for instance, in our Bologna University, an entire course of studies on the social economy. We, in Europe, are now working for putting in place another pillar of the union called the social pillar. And this was decided in 2017, and in 2021, the European Union launched an action plan, and each nation now is building up its nation plan for the social economy. Things can be done. Yeah, not in the United States at the moment. I've discontinued my teaching into this American branch of the Johns Hopkins University because it was too complicated for me, to teach in an American university in the present times. Fortunately, we still have some possibilities.
Yeah.
And then it depends on how many people will engage in this.
Yeah.
Actually, in this course, which is a 5 years course, university course, in which we offer very specialized courses in terms of building up the social economy, and particularly cooperatives, social enterprises, non-profit, and so on and so forth. We in Italy had a reform in 2016 of the non-profit sector called third sector alla French, which is now put into effect, and many social enterprises have been or benefit. For instance, again in 2016, we had a law on the benefit corporations, B Corp also called. I don't know whether you know them. No, we have a law in Italy, legislation in Italy that allows some for-profit enterprises to have in their statutes also social aims, social goals, social targets, and be called the benefit corporation. We have more than 3,000 in Italy of these that are selected this approach. So,
if in the past, so the Berlusconi in particular, he cut back tax privileges for the co-ops who relied on them, and obviously there's a right-wing government in place currently in Italy. So,
but it doesn't do anything against the cooperatives,
right?
By all means.
Yeah.
But cooperatives do not live as a result of tax allowances. Tax allowances will in a way, contribute, if you like, definitely, but I mean, they do not live off only this, but because people like to go. And I mean, I am a member of 3 co-ops, and in Italy you find plenty of people who are members of 1, 2, 3 co-ops, and we like to have them there.
It's more just a case of like, if, because there's still, even in Italy, you were talking earlier about the fact that there are some individuals who would like to embrace the American model, and but obviously at least Italy has, the constitution has got these laws, and so for them to do that, for one individual or a small group of individuals to undermine everything that currently exists, and therefore the potential for co-ops to be nurtured in the future and for that to build is limited, whereas maybe in the UK and elsewhere.
Yeah, I totally agree. This is the reason why I pointed out that Article 45 of our Constitution has been strategic in this, because definitely so. But I mean, each country has its own history, and of course the Italians are responsible of continuously supporting this approach to doing business and managing the economy in general, because we have put conditions that are favorable to this. But other places, if they want to change, isn't your changing the narrative approach? No, there is no alternative to changing the narrative. Otherwise, you just surrender and say, that's it.
Yeah.
But if you don't want to surrender, there is not much alternative. So many people are coming and living in Italy because they love to stay in a place in which big business is not, in a way, controlling everything. This is our responsibility. Your responsibility is to try and put better conditions in other places. But I mean, Finland, for instance, is another greatly cooperative place in which practically the entire population is a member of some cooperative. Very many Finnish friends, and they're really like this. Many other also European countries. France has a large amount of cooperatives present in France. In France. And a very interesting thing, which in a way is a bit disturbing, but I want to point it out, is that often the French cooperatives behave as cooperatives inside the country, but when they go abroad and branch out abroad, behave as profit institution. The worst example is Crédit Agricole, which is made up of more than 1,000 local cooperatives in France. But in my country, Italy, it behaves like one of the most for-profit banks of the country, which is a bit disturbing.
Yeah.
So maybe some legislation also on the part of the European Union would be needed, that this sort of hybrid approach should not be allowed. If you are a cooperative, you should behave as a cooperative. But anyhow.
Yeah, absolutely. But then, as you've mentioned, the culture is key. It's nurturing that culture, having the culture in place. And with Italy's experience and history, it's the laws and the constitution followed the culture and not the other way around. It's like, obviously putting those laws in place will help, maintain and help nurture and ensure a particular beneficial culture can be sustained in the face of the forces that we're experiencing currently. And that gives it resilience and kind of future proofs it to a degree. But, for any other country that hasn't put those things in place, it's got to start with culture. And it's got to start with, people demanding it and expecting it and wanting it.
And also building some experimental. The other day, 2 or 3 days ago, I was speaking with a New York group of people because the mayor of New York today, the new mayor Mamdani, very, very famous, wants to reorganize the entire system of 0 to 6 schools, childcare, right? And they conceived the idea of having a political support of doing this through building cooperatives in the place. So they wanted me to speak of the social cooperatives, how they are organized and so on and so forth. And then at the end, I said, well, you should experiment, try to build a project, and put in place the project not in one single place of New York, but in 5 different areas, so as to see how the different categories of people would react, and collect reactions, and then work on it. If you find either a political will or a situation of people who want to protest against, and build some examples, maybe something will happen. Who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. And that participatory approach is important. If it is coming from top down, that it is done through engaging the people on the ground, the people who are the key stakeholders, the people who are going to be using the.
I recommended, as I said, to build the project, you have to engage people from civil society who like this kind of approach, and ask then the political support on the project that civil society will offer, rather than the opposite.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, maybe. But I found the group of people who wanted me to participate into their meeting, their sort of foundation meeting of this project, really motivated, because they said the situation we're having is unsustainable. Because, in Emilia-Romagna, we have a coverage of 90% of the 0 to 6. So we have 90% of the children which take advantage of schools, either public or cooperatives. Yeah. So practically everyone who wants to put a child in school finds place. And if they are below certain level of income, they don't pay anything. Otherwise, there is some contribution which is progressive, seems sensible, as an idea. And so I explained this. Who knows? But if you are not convinced that this is a good idea, there is nothing to do. No?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't believe in having a service which is so important, education 0 to 6, extremely strategic for the future of society. If you are not convinced that it is better to have a universal system which works on an equitable basis and participation and so on, because I said these co-ops, according to the Italian approach, could be small at the basis, but then networked into a couple of layers of umbrella organizations that provide support, provide services, and so on. And so coupling the proximity to the territory and the people and the children, in this case, who are looked after, with some sort of organization which is more sort of effective because it is done on a larger scale. No? So one thing that I didn't have the opportunity to mention in this conversation was exactly that I believe in networks.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not the case that the small and medium-sized enterprises must work alone. They have to be put into networks, particularly if they are cooperatives, and have cooperation among cooperatives, which is an entirely different approach compared to the capitalist one. The capitalist approach is a cutthroat competition, but instead the cooperative approach is compete together. Try to find the best approach to certain service or certain product, working together.
Just to wrap up, are there examples of that? Because obviously that would be a fantastic way of countering the need to focus on growth and that expansion, that Anglo-Saxon kind of approach to things in terms of that growth-centric viewpoint.
But Italy too is growth-centric, Italy too is growth-centric, but not at any cost.
Right, yeah.
No.
But
not getting over the people, but through the people, with the people. And if the conditions are not good enough to allow this approach, which in my view is really a very humanistic approach, to flourish in a period, at the very least, not in my name, I will not contribute to the other approach, which is destroying humanity.
So are there existing examples of a networked cooperative movement that is functioning effectively?
In general, all the European cooperative movements are networked. This is quite generalized. But in the Italian case, networks are very thick because at the very least we have 3 levels of networking. The first is what we call consortium, which is grouping of a number of enterprises acting together, but being administered separately. And acting together, for instance, to get engagement by private or by state to do certain services or certain products. Then we have a second layer, which is sectorial, connecting all the co-ops which do certain type of activity, like social co-ops, like distributive co-ops, like manufacturing co-ops, like agricultural co-ops. And then we have a final layer, the umbrella organizations, which put together all these elements, all these layers, and try to make them compatible one with the other. And intervening if things go wrong, because the umbrella organizations, according to one piece of legislation that we have in Italy, the 1992 piece of legislation, the top umbrella organization, which in Italy are 3 top umbrella organizations, because pluralism also in this in Italy. In Europe, normally they have one single, and have a fund which is made up of 3% of the profits of the single co-ops, which is paid into this fund, and the fund has the role of helping new COPs or reorganizing all COPs that are not doing well. So you realize how thick is the networking in Italy, extremely thick, because we have several layers. Networking. But in general, cooperatives, the sixth principle of cooperatives around the world is cooperation among COPs. So it's practice in general, although, as I say, I mean, in Italy particularly. And then the seventh principle has been introduced by the Italian president in the 1990s of the International Cooperative Alliance, which is catering for the community. Because normally cooperatives were somewhat inward looking, but then the seventh principle, catering for the community, and therefore having the possibility to collaborate, have alliances with several other subjects in the community, to do things together.
Right, yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
I'm very glad to have had the possibility to talk to you. You understand so many things.
Well, thank you.
And I spent the entire life, in fact, in trying to counter the dehumanization of mainstream economics. I'm rather satisfied, I would say, because in spite of the great power that they have in their hands, there are so many people now who realize that power is not enough. To go to the moon or to go to Mars may be interesting, but I mean, to care for people maybe is a better opportunity and a better job.
Absolutely. I agree completely. Thanks again.
Ciao.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Everything Vera and I discussed is in the show notes, and you'll find this episode in the full archive at content.changingthenarrative.media, where you can also become a member, which includes hearing how Vera actually found her way into this work, and sign up for the newsletter. Please share, comment, and subscribe wherever you listen to this podcast, so more people can learn about the alternative ways we can build our systems. If you would like to support the podcast and Changing the Narrative, then please consider becoming a paying member. New episodes of the Changing the Narrative podcast are available every second Tuesday. Thanks for listening.